For the last week or more, we've seen horrors of a knife attack in the town of Southport, 3 young children being murdered, and then lies spread around about the identity of the murderer, blamed on Muslims or migrants. And that's a very familiar, nasty rhetoric that Muslims have become used to in this country. But it's led to a lot of rioting and thuggery and attacks on streets, in masajid, shops, cars. And the question of people has come, why? Why is this always happening? What's the cause of it? Well, I'd like to give you my thoughts on that. We aren't in a situation as Muslims living in the UK like the Muslims of Palestine, thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Muslims who are in Myanmar, the Rohingya Muslims, or in East Turkestan, or actually in any average Muslim country where people might feel hardship, or in countries where Muslims live as a minority, like in India, where they face extreme hardship. In those places where people are threatened, their lives are threatened, their livelihoods are threatened, they actually just carry on with life. They don't deal with problems as if they're a catastrophe. They learn to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are many good people in this country who don't buy into the Islamophobic and the racist narrative and lies that are being spread. So we need to get things in perspective, and we need to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we look at what the causes might be. When I look at this problem and I try to think about what the causes are of this frankly anti-Muslim and anti-migrant narrative that is creating all this problem and all this noise and fear, I could break it down to 3 things. One is the establishment narrative. The narrative from the politicians and the media in the UK that's been coming for over 2 decades at least. The second are the racist agitators that we see mainly online that fan the flames of this and exaggerate what's happening or misinform people about what's happening. And that needs to be looked at. And the third is frankly the systemic problem of xenophobia and racism that occurs to a lesser or greater degree in any nation state. And often in European countries, you'll see it's to a greater degree, and we'll look at that. So when I think of the establishment, I look back at the last 20 to 25 years, and I see the atmosphere as it was in the so-called war on terror, where British foreign policy, American foreign policy, Western foreign policy in the Muslim world, particularly Afghanistan and Iraq, backfired spectacularly. Criminal wars causing destabilization in many places around the world, and instead of facing up to what they'd done, the politicians and the establishment chose to blame the Muslims, blame Islam, call it Islamism, have a prevent policy, problematize Muslims everywhere and focus people on that rather than on the chaos they created. As part of that, Prime Minister Tony Blair in 2006 declared the end of a policy of multiculturalism, a policy that put simply said, my grandfather could wear his shalwar kameez, have his beard and go into the mosque. And generation by generation, his son and his grandson and his great-grandson would become more assimilated into the UK. Well, Blair ended that policy. Cameron introduced it, a more aggressive, muscular liberalism, a bit more like a French-style approach to minorities, where everyone had to buy into the same values and beliefs and loyalties. And from Blair and Cameron onwards, you've seen this relentless attacks on Muslims and the narrative of migrants fits into that very much. There's a lot of misunderstanding about migration and asylum seeking, deliberately so. If you look at legal migrants who came on visas for jobs or as students from places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Europe, India, there were 700,000 people allowed by the government to come to the UK. Approximate numbers, okay, so almost 700,000 people. Set against that, there were 80,000 people who applied to come to the UK as asylum seekers, and 2/3 of those were legal. They were not illegitimate. Their cases were upheld. So the number of illegal or illegitimate asylum seekers compared to the overall number of people allowed into the UK is tiny. So why blame them? Another failure of policy by successive governments. That's why. Because those governments, from the Blair government onwards, didn't ensure there were enough school places, didn't ensure that health services could cope, didn't ensure that housing and jobs were adequate for people, didn't ensure that British people who are out of work could be retrained to do those jobs. So instead of facing up to their own policy failures, They blame the migrants. Stop the boats, they say. That's the narrative that you've heard from Blair and Cameron right through to Sunak and Starmer. Starmer, who in the most recent general elections started pointing the finger at people from Bangladesh when they make up a tiny proportion of asylum seekers or legal migrants even. Dog whistle politics that we're used to hearing. If you add to that the British state's establishment and defense of the Zionist occupation of Palestine and its ongoing slaughter in Gaza, and the type of rhetoric from people like Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak talking about hate marches, where peaceful protests are portrayed as hate marches, you then understand maybe why this escalation of rhetoric about Muslims and migrants has appeared as these people have lost the narrative on supporting their occupation in Palestine. That's the establishment narrative that we have to understand. When it comes to the racist agitators who you might see online or on TV, name could be Tommy, name could be Nigel, name could be Lawrence, name could be Andrew, and they go on online or on the TV and they basically reinforce the rhetoric against migrants or asylum seekers or Muslims, either overtly or covertly, stoking up the fears, stoking up the lies sometimes even. When you come to these people, you've got to understand them in a certain way. Some of them are just frankly got an inferiority complex. They see Muslims very confident in their belief, very confident in their religion, not willing to buy into a lot of the rubbish we hear in the world today. And they really don't like that. They feel very inadequate about themselves and they project that by being hostile towards Muslims. Some of them are just self-promoting narcissists, frankly. They're there to just make their name bigger, and some of them probably make a fast buck out of it as well, whether that's through votes or whether that's through viewers online or whether that's through paid subscriptions. You've got to understand it that way, but there is a dark force behind some of these people that has to be understood. Some of them have unquestionably been funded by the Zionist lobby, and some are part of a war, I would say, within Western establishment. They will blame the matrix for being a problem, but actually the people that back them are often part of the matrix. Trump, for example, very much a capitalist, businessman, billionaire who comes into politics through conventional means, and he's a disruptor to the political system. Not because he's fundamentally against it, no, but because he is part of a section and backed by a section of Western thinking that has a problem with another section of Western thinking. And some of these people, the Trump supporters, Steve Bannon, who was his advisor, who's backed by a billionaire Robert Mercer, who have campaigns online that often have been said to target Muslims and problematize Muslims and Islam. Those people are often very supportive of the likes of Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage. I mean, Steve Bannon has been openly supportive of these people. So that is the dark force behind some of these racist agitators online, who are a complex bunch and a different bunch with different kind of inadequacies and motivations to drive them. The problem of the systemic racism and xenophobia in a nation state is because the political construct of the nation state with a flag is often linked to race. So if you're properly English, you've got to be white. If you're properly French, you've got to have roots going back in France and be a white Frenchman, etc., etc. Germany, famous in the 20th century for wanting pure Aryan blood. That's the problem of the nation state. In the nation state, you're always going to get a section of people that are so nationalistic that they're frankly racist towards incomers. That's a problem you're going to see. We see it living in Britain, but it isn't unique to Britain. Unfortunately, the Muslim world has become nation states over the last 100 years. So when you look at Turkey, and you see the racism towards Syrian refugees there. When you look at Pakistan and the government of Pakistan talking about Afghani refugees and booting them out in a very, very frankly sectarian way. When you look at the way that the Rohingya Muslims were treated in Bangladesh, all of these things illustrate to you the problem of the nation state. You can't do much about that within the system. For us as Muslims, we have a belief that rises above that. The Prophet ﷺ was a migrant. He migrated from Mecca to Medina. And when he arrived there and was given the position of the head of the society of Medina, the leader of Medina, the political and religious leader both, What did he do? He didn't divide people on a tribal basis. He paired up the muhajir, the migrant, with the ansar, the resident of Medina, as brothers. And he actually told them to look after each other like you would your own blood brother, rising above the base nationalism in accordance with the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that says to humanity, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin aw untha. We created you all from a man and a woman. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. And we made you into tribes and nations and different types of people so you'll know each other, you get to know each other. And Allah said, إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. Allah said that the best amongst you is based on your taqwa, your consciousness of Allah, and how you manifest that in good behavior. So Islam should rise us above that base nationalism that talks about people's skin colors and their ethnicity in a way that divides people. And instead, we should celebrate that, so trying to know each other as human beings and our differences as human beings. So how do we move forward in this mess that we've frankly got between the establishment, the racist agitators, and the systemic problems that happen in nation states? How do we play between these different agendas? It's not easy. I don't expect much from politicians who helped create much of the problem that we have today. I am wary that many of them and some naive Muslims will call for more laws, more policies, more securitization of our community, thinking that they're trying to protect the community, but actually finding that they're going to end up with more restrictions on the community, more spying on the community, and more laws that actually undermine the community. I'm reminded of the slogan that one brother used to use, no silence, no violence. We don't have to meet this kind of level of aggression with aggression, but we should follow the example of the Prophet ﷺ, because he was not afraid to remain steadfast on his mission. If he had an argument put to him, he was not afraid to respond to the argument with an argument better than that from Islam. If he faced abuse from some ignorant person, he was not afraid to sometimes just walk on by and ignore that abuse. With impeccable behavior and integrity, and remaining steadfast and trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is sufficient for us, you and I can carry on practicing our deen, conveying our deen, living our lives as the best Muslims we can without fear, and really trying to understand and really maybe trying to lift as many people here as we can out of the darkness of base nationalism, and also trying to expose the establishment agendas and the agendas of the racist agitators, so that people maybe inshallah can understand more about this situation. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.